Hi there. Welcome to Creation Station Monthly. This is our monthly show where we get two creative people in who have never met each other until they just showed up in our green room, and we talk about something that they're passionate about. Today's topic is producing, and we are going to find out what the difference is in between being talent and being a director and being a producer, because I'm sure that's the first question most people have is like, what does a producer actually do? Greg, please fill us in on what you do, and then Lauren, take over after. Just come in.
Whatever I can. How about that? I am a film, television, and music producer. I've worked in feature films. I've done television programming, lots of commercials, and also music. I was a record producer, started there and a musician, and then kind of spiraled through the whole production chain, if you will, in all the different areas. So I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
And don't sell wait, the awards. Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, so I have a very cool paperweight. It's called an Emmy, and it sits there and collects dust because that's what they do. It's all about getting views, I guess, is the whole thing. You know?
Miss Lauren, tell us.
Hi, I'm Lauren Migaki. I'm a producer for NPR's education team, which just means that I am usually the behind the scenes person on all of our audio stories, a lot of our podcasts. And I also get loaned out a lot to our international desk. So I've done about 6 different stints in various war zones around the world where I help make sure that our news gets on air.
Yeah. Just casually mention that one. Yeah. This is why we do this show, folks. We've got some really interesting people here. So I do want to touch base on that. What is the difference in between directing and producing? Lauren, you go first, and then Greg, fill us in, because I know you both do it from different angles.
Well, I feel like in radio, at least, the directing of it all is like you're dealing with all the elements of a live thing, right? It is happening right now. It's the difference between probably, I don't know, Greg, you could probably speak to this, the difference between listening to an album and going to a live concert, right? But it's just people talking into microphones for me. But I've done the directing where, you pick out the music that comes after stories, news stories, and you have to match the tone. You don't want it to be too happy if it's, a sad story. And then you're literally directing the mics to open and sometimes getting guests on the line. And sometimes their phone line drops midway through. And it's a lot of kind of thinking quickly on your feet and kind of crisis management. Whereas producing, I think, speaks to a more control freak side where you have lots of time to work on your beautiful audio piece and make it perfect and then send it out into the world.
Greg, tell us about your side of it.
So it depends on which field we're talking about. So what I've learned, and this is one of the things that I always found very interesting, is that in each area of production or in each kind of subfield, they'll use different terms for everything. So if we're talking film, you've got a producer and a director, and the director is generally the creative head of the production team, if you will. Right, they're calling the shots. They're basically the manager of the actual team that's doing it. Whereas the producer is generally the administrative, like the CFO, if you will. They're the ones handling the money, organizing it. The old Hollywood adage, it's only a problem if you don't have money to throw at it. And so like that's their job. So in film, you've got your producer is the overall money executive, and your director is the creative control. In music, the producer is the general creative control person, and the executive producer is the money management kind of person. So like they're different. So depending on what you're talking about, the terms can change. But generally, I mean, I think pretty much the roles are all still the same. You have someone who's usually going to be worrying about the money, keeping on budget, keeping on time, and you have someone who's going to be the creative visionary that's basically managing the team to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. And depending on what area you're in, they may change those names, but it's the same concept.
And is that where that whole executive producer tagline thing comes from in movies and stuff, right?
Yeah, well, there's 2 parts. In movies, yeah, that's the other thing. In music, the producer is the creative and the executive producer is the money person. In film, the director is the creative, the producer is the money person. The executive producer is anyone that gave them money.
Okay.
Or did a favor for them. It's like the ultimate title that you just can give to anybody who does something. It was like, hey, this guy spent 3 days rounding up food for everybody. Give him an executive producer credit. and it's kind of an overall title. So you'll see like 600 executive producers on a project. That's why. It's pretty much the title to give to anybody who wasn't actively involved in the production team, at least in film, actively involved in the production team, but yet contributed somehow.
I just
Lauren,
want to
that
say in
doesn't
public
happen.
radio, I have never ever been trusted to make a financial decision or been expected to give the money. It is completely opposite. It's all creative, and very rarely am I entrusted with money, which is a good thing.
That is hilarious. And I'm supposing you don't get executive producer credits out there at NPR either, do you?
We do have executive producers, but they're more like they make the editorial decisions.
Okay.
It's more of that, yeah.
Interesting. So I want to hear from you, Lauren. Tell me, how did you get into this? We always ask the question, how did you fall into this field, and were you eating plants in the backyard when it's science? How do you get into producing from being a youngster did you always want to, I don't know. This is my question.
I think you start with someone who has pretty bad ADHD, and you go from there. I never quite realized that or put that together, but I always liked listening to radio and podcasts because I could do other things while I was listening, and that's how I learn, right? I can't really sit still when I'm learning, and I think a lot of people feel that way. So I was always, I just really like listening to things. I like books on tape, but I never really understood that I could do that as a job. So I think I changed my major 6 times in college because I was someone who was interested in everything. And so thankfully I found journalism, because that's one where like every day you could be doing a story about something different, and it really serves that like desire for variety. But I was a graphic designer in college. That's what I ultimately ended up graduating with. Didn't really love it. I don't think I had great talent for it. But I find that, when you know how to tell a story, it doesn't really matter the medium. And I was lucky enough to just land an internship at NPR and like learned everything on the job.
Nice. Greg, did you start in music or did you start in producing this stuff first?
I started as a musician. I started in music. I started working professionally as a musician when I was about 14. And that led into production. I started engineering in the studio probably about 2 years after that. And then I went to Boston. I was at Berklee College of Music for 4 years. I got my degree in music production and engineering, so studio technology and engineering. And then left there, relocated down here to Fort Lauderdale area, and started working for ad agencies at that point. And so I started doing a lot of advertising. Most started with radio, which was a little bit of a departure from the thing. I actually was working simultaneously in several different studios. One of them was doing this underground hip hop, record label owned the studio. And so I did a lot of that stuff for them. And simultaneously during the days, I was working with an ad agency at their studio doing radio commercials and on-hold messages, things like that. That led into, I left there and opened my own agency for a while. I ran that and as a production agency and started doing audio stuff. And that led into video, which had more money at the time. So I'm like, how hard can it be? And so I got some film gear and basically kind of got fairly proficient at it. And I started offering that to clients, started doing that. And then I ended up doing a ton of television commercials. And I got with a television station, started working with them for a while. And then, so it's kind of been around the horn. And then back in like 2006, I kind of dumped into the film field and getting into feature film work, which just seemed like it'd be more interesting. And it's also a lot more work. So I haven't done a whole lot of that since, dabbled in here and there. But, it's been good because I've been able to piece together a pretty good living doing a little of this, a little of that, which is really, what else can you ask for?
Yeah.
Pay the bills and try to be happy. And that's really all you can do.
Having fun with what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there a difference in producing video? I know there must be, but between video and audio, there must be a huge gulf in producing, as you talked about earlier. But when you're doing the audio portion of it,
mm-hmm.
and because you said commercials, and then you said all the various different things, and then music, how is that producing for music different than what Lauren does for producing voice? Even though I'm guessing Lauren does more than just voice.
Yeah, I'm sure she does. I mean, what I tell people, I says production is production. Audio, video, film, it's all really the same thing. You're just using a different tool set. You know, it's like one carpenter might be really good with a hammer and another one prefers a nail gun, you know, but in the end, you're building something that people want to consume, or people are exposed to consuming, whether it's a commercial. I don't know if people really want to watch commercials, but, you know, it's something else that they do, you know, so it's something you're putting together and communicating something, whether that's an emotion or a narrative or a visual presentation. You know, I mean, I would even argue, you know, if you can do a PowerPoint presentation, you know, it's kind of the same skill set that you would use if you're doing a feature film or if you're putting together an album. What differs is the individual tools you're using to do the job, and learning those tools and learning the terminology that people in that industry are comfortable with. Like when I was studying up in Boston early on, I remember one of the producers that I used to work with, well, several of them have said this, but one of them specifically said, you're going to come to a point where you're going to be, say, working with a producer as an engineer. And that producer is in all seriousness, with a straight face, going to turn to you and say, hey, can you make that guitar sound more orange? And I thought they were kidding. And I swear this is the absolute truth. I had a producer that I was working with one time. I was just engineering, and he asked me that literal question, and I almost fell out of my chair because I didn't believe it was real. But it is, because the producer I was working with was predominantly a visual thinker. And so he knew what he wanted to hear, but had no idea how to explain it in words. And so he used a color palette because that's what he was comfortable with. And I kind of learned that over the years working in all the different areas of production, that's the biggest challenge to moving between them. It's not doing the work, it's understanding what people are asking for. I'll give you another example, or kind of a few examples that are related. Between video and television and film, they use different terminology for things, as I mentioned before. But one of the classic examples is on a film set, you'll hear people all the time say, hey, can you grab me a C-47? It's like, what the hell is a C-47? They're asking for a wooden clothespin. And that's what they use to hold gels on lights or to clip things together. And so I actually had to look it up and figure out why. Why is it a C-47? And it turns out, and I don't remember the name of the company, but there's a very famous supply house in Los Angeles that caters to the film industry. And for decades, they published this paper catalog. And the wooden clothespins would come in a bag of 100, and it was item C-47. And so that's how you would order it from the supply house. You would order item C-47. And so everyone in Hollywood calls them C-47s. It's just a wooden clothespin, like you'd hang your clothes on a clothesline. But that's what they call it in film. But you say that to someone in a television station, they look at you like you have three heads. They're like, what are you talking about? Because they don't use it. Another one, we always call them, a power cable that you would plug things in. We call it an extension cord. But on a film set, they call them stingers, because if you're not careful, you get zapped by it. So they have different terms for everything, and you have to learn what they mean when they say something. That's the hardest part of bouncing from one area to the other, is just getting used to those differences.
And that look, Lauren, like, oh no, I've been electrocuted before on set.
Well, I gotta say, I agree with some of what you're saying here, Greg, which is that it's all just in service of telling a story, right? Or telling a narrative. But I also think there are I have never worked in TV, and that's on purpose, because you all have to get a shot perfectly, right? You have so much more equipment. I love the freedom of just showing up with a little microphone. I'm pretty nondescript, and I don't have to get a perfect shot. I just have to record kind of close to the thing. But I think also the thing about each medium, and I think the best thing about creativity is when you have constraints on it, right? And so when it comes to radio, we don't have any sort of benefit of anyone seeing anything that we're describing, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to create this scene with all of this sound that you've gathered. I can't, unlike music, you can't manipulate the sound, but I've gone to the rainforest and gathered the sounds of the birds and the leaves and the river running, so that I can transport my listeners there without having to tell them where I am, and make it feel like an experience, they're there with me. And then you also want them to feel like they are meeting people. And I think TV has this beautiful quality of you meet someone, you see their face, and you feel this connection. When it comes to audio, I think you have this benefit of like, usually people are putting you right inside their ears and it's really intimate. It's like, calling your mom on the phone or something. And so the quality of someone's voice, the emotion in someone's voice, it's something that like a transcript can't catch. So, whether you have to know which medium you're working in to play to the strength to like tell the best story.
And how does that work for you, Lauren, when you're doing podcast versus live? When you're doing a story that's on like Morning Edition or something like that, that's not technically a live thing most times. They're playing a bit of tape you've done previous, right?
Most of the time, yeah. If they're doing an interview, that's often live. And you can often tell if there's, like a dropout in the line or whatever. But I think if you're putting together kind of like, I think in TV, they maybe call it a package, but we just call it a piece. It's something where we've carefully put the sounds of the forest in, and then we've told the story with the reporter over it, and we have little bits of interview snippets. I almost think of it as like a collage. I think maybe I am a visual person because it's like you're collaging all of these different elements that you've gathered to make this story.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And now, is it different from doing a podcast though? I mean, I'm guessing it's time frame, like a story that you're doing for tomorrow's show versus, okay, I can take time to make the podcast.
It really depends on what kind of podcast you're talking about, right? Because some podcasts are just like, you and me talking, and that's one version. I think, and maybe Greg, you can speak to this. I think there's this saying in many parts of video businesses, which is like 1 minute of story means that like an hour of work behind the scenes at least. And I think that's true with a really creative podcast, the ones that you hear lots of sounds and lots of interviews. There's hours and hours and like, I know people who've sat in 5-hour long edits just trying to get it exactly right. Cause you want to make sure that the story is clear. Like the whole point is to make sure that your listener knows what's going on at the end of it. Right.
I have, I'm reminiscing now of things that I've learned and things that I haven't thought about in years. I worked with a guy, he was one of my mentors, a producer. His name was Wayne Wadhams, and he had done everything. He'd done record production. He had done film production, television production. So he'd kind of been all around the whole scene. And he was, if you remember, there was a gentleman, sadly Wayne passed away, and he was a brilliant man. He reminded me, if you remember the guy, Christopher Lowell, who did the house decoration stuff for you, he looked and acted exactly like him. And he used to have all these phrases. One of my favorites, he would say, remember, there's only so much you can polish a turd. And in the end, you're just going to have a very shiny turd. And he would have these phrases, these turns of phrases he would do. And he used to talk a lot about production, and he says, look, you can spend 100 hours getting it right, but you have to ask yourself, is this something that someone's going to sit in their car and make a smiley face on the graphic equalizer, listen to once and never be heard from again? He goes, don't kill yourself over this. Get it to the point that it does the job and move on. He goes, if you're making something that people are going to watch or listen to over and over and over for the next 50 years, then take the time and get it right. But it's like anything else, you're the right tool for the right job. And he used to approach that from a production standpoint as well. He's like, ask yourself, is this good enough? And he goes, because nothing you ever do will ever be perfect at all. And I mean, you can look at film production. You look at, George Lucas is a classic example. It's 50 years later, and he's still re-editing things he did 50 years ago because he's not happy with them. It's just the way it works. And you'll never be satisfied. It'll never be done. So the question is it good enough? And if the answer is yes, then put it out there and make a living and make money.
Just please give me the 50 different versions. Leave the original one for me to see.
Right.
You can go make your edits and then just keep the originals. So Greg just answered one of our. Go, Greg. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I may have taken advice a little bit too closely because I have made a career out of being, that's good enough.
What is the Lorne Michaels famous saying about Saturday Night Live? The show doesn't go on because it's ready. It goes on because it's Saturday night,
Exactly. No, it's true. And then live's a whole nother thing, of course,
Yeah. So, Lauren, Greg mentioned his mentor. How about you? Who got you into this? Who was one of the mentors that you...
One, I'd have to choose.
No, you don't have to choose one. Fill them all in. I don't.
It's funny because I feel like we learn from everyone we interact with, right? We're so lucky. And I was lucky enough to come up at Morning Edition, which lucky is it was the overnight shift. And it's pretty much filled with 22-year-olds who are able to handle that schedule. I was working midnight to 7 a.m. But because of that, we just got endless FaceTime with our hosts. And so I think I owe huge parts of my career to the former host of Morning Edition, David Green, and the current host, Steve Inskeep, because they would just let me sit next to them while they wrote their stories. And I can't tell you how many editors and producers that just let me sit there and watch them. And it sounds so silly, but you kind of, even though creativity sometimes seems like this innate thing, you also kind of have to be taught how to do it sometimes, and like the rules of each one and what works and what doesn't. And you have to like watch people try things yourself and see if it falls flat or if it doesn't. But I think so often about Steve Inskeep in particular. If you came to him with an idea, even if he didn't care anything about it, I think one time we did a story on some like sci-fi rap album. He didn't know anything about it. And he was just like, I don't care because you're passionate about it. I will do the story. Just tell me, put your thoughts on paper and we'll work on it together. And I really loved like that spirit of generosity of like, if you care about something, then like, I'm going to work with you to make that great.
That's a very good thing. And you have to know the rules to be able to break them. So
ain't that the truth?
Yeah. That is okay, man. You got me all so wrapped up here. Now I'm just going on to this. So Greg touched on this a little bit, but Lauren, what was your career before doing this? Or you went from graphic artist and you said you got to be the intern at NPR. Was there an in-between spot there? How does somebody turn this idea of being a producer into a career?
That's a good question. I did a lot of internships in college in graphic design. I worked for an ad agency. I did editorial work for like an alternative weekly. So I had done writing and I had done graphic design, and I had never really gotten any experience in radio. And I applied for the internship program at NPR. And I really do credit the fact that I was a graphic designer to having like a nice looking resume that was easier to pick out of the pile. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I think like so much of things, it's about how long you're willing to do something and to be humble and learn and also work crappy hours. Because I think it's not always easy to hang out in an industry that is, journalism is an industry that isn't always making money, and they're always asking you to do more and more with less. But I think I got really lucky in that I joined NPR at a time when the Arab Spring was happening, and they sent all of their good producers abroad to Libya, to Egypt to go cover that. And like the little, 22-year-old me got to sit around and like help produce music interviews and movie interviews and business interviews and like kind of learn the ropes. I had like a huge amount of time while they were off covering the big story.
That's awesome. Greg, what about you? What do you think is the way to go about it if you wanted to turn it into a career? Because you dibble and dabble in everything.
Yeah, I've kind of come from a different perspective. And one of the things, again, this is another a Wattism, as I like to call them, the Wayne Wattums, since there's Wattisms. Another one was like, he's like, if you want work, go make it. And at first it kind of sounds a little strange, but there's a truth to it. And that is this: when you like, all right, maybe not as much in journalism, but at least in film and television, everyone's like, oh, it's so glitzy, it's so much fun, it's and everyone wants to be in it. Ask anyone who's ever picked up a camera, I want to be a director, right? I want to get the glory. I want to be a famous director. And so anytime you have an industry that attracts so many people because they think it's this glorious thing, the wages just drop and they plummet. And it's hard to make a living because if there's 1,000 people willing to do the job, guess what's going to happen to the price on that they're willing to pay for that job, supply and demand. And so what you learn really quickly is that the best way to have work is to make it yourself, like literally decide. And I think that's where production really comes in. And as producers, in my opinion, a producer is something that you end up being because you can't make a living by not being. And so you just, I guess I'm a producer now, and I'm going to make a project. I'm going to come up with an idea, and I'm going to put it together, and I'm going to hire people, and and that's just what you do to have work, really. I mean, it sounds horrible, and it's not. It's still a great industry.
It sounds chaotic and creative.
It is chaotic. It is a little bit chaotic, but other things I've heard, it says, look, if you want to be an artist, that's great. You can live in mommy and daddy's basement and make art all day long. If you want to have a career, then you pack up your pride and you make stuff that people want to watch, and you sell it and you make money. And then you can take your profit and go and make all the art you want. He said the only thing that's really selling out is, not working, like not doing it. He goes, sell out, take the money, go to the bank, have a great life, and make all the art you want. And if you're lucky and someone else says, wow, that art is amazing, I'm going to pay you for your art, then you don't have to sell out anymore. But I will sell out every day of the week. If someone is willing to write a check, no problem. What do you want me to make? I'll make the worst thing ever made. I mean, you look at who was the filmmaker? I want to say John Waters, was that his name? The one that did all those B. No, I'm mixing him up with someone else. The one who did all those B movies in like the 50s and 60s.
Ed Wood.
He was one of them. There was 2 or 3.
I'm the wrong person to ask about movies.
But there were 2 or 3 guys, but I can picture his face. But the point is if you watch, he made like 1,000 movies, and everyone is just awful, but they all made money, and he made a great living, and he knows they're awful, and he admits it. He's like, yeah, they're not great, but who cares? I made money. And that's true. It's a different way of looking at things. And production is really about having the drive and the desire to see a project come from an idea into fruition somehow, I think, is really what it comes down to.
Well, can I piggyback on that? Because you said something about like, if you want to make it, just make it. And I think that's 100% true. And I think that thing I would like yes and to that is also talk to the people who are making it. Like, I can't tell you how many like interns come in or new employees come in at NPR, and the ones who I know are going to make it are the ones who ask me just like humbly for like my thoughts on a thing. Like, first of all, you have to have the courage to ask someone for feedback, right? And then you kind of have to have the courage to take it, and like just the curiosity to get better. And I feel like I've seen some people who, and I was myself this, like too shy to ask for help, or a little too much ego to take the criticism, or like when you start your career, there's a huge gap between what you want to be and what you are in the talent. And like, you really, I think, have to reach out to those people in that time in order to like get to the place you want to be of being good at it.
And Lauren, do you have a chance, like Greg was just talking about, just go out and just create? I mean, do you have, you're at a position now where you can kind of pick your stories, I'm thinking, but do you still have like, okay, we need to cover this kind of topic this week because this is what's happening in the news?
It's a real mix, right? It's, you have various news that comes down because something tragic happened or because a political thing happened or whatever. But then there's also these like kind of, you foster on the back burner some creative ideas. Like I've been thinking, and I should probably stop talking about it and do it, but like I just really want to do a story on class pets, like I think there's actually a lot more to class pets than we think. There's like, you're learning about caretaking and you're learning about biology, and like it's a communal activity. You learn to work together as a team. And
we used to have fish at the library. I used to have a fish tank, and the kids would go up and check on the fish every time they came into the building.
It's like a community building thing. Yeah. And like there's a lot to it. And so that's not an urgent idea. It's not a new idea. It's just a story that could be really well told with like lovely characters and kids' voices. And so I think you have the thing about it all is you have to manage like the things you have to do, as Greg was saying, to like get paid and keep doing the work. And you have to keep fostering and like adding to the pot some of these like longer term dreams. I mean, the class pets is a small dream, but you kind of have to have those both.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Lauren. So Lauren, this is because I have the most respect for anyone who does journalism or documentary work, because personally, I love documentaries. I hate working on them. Like, because I do not want to have to sit down and watch through 800 hours of footage to figure out, is there a story here? Which is what I have friends who do documentary work, and they're like, oh, you should do this. I'm like, hell no. No. You give me a script, whatever's in that, I'm going to shoot that. That's what you're getting. This is what we're doing. But
You're killing me because like I love the messiness of life, you know,
Right.
like I haven't done much documentary, but I have spent a lot of time following people for years on end. We followed some folks who were incarcerated who were getting their college degree, and we visited them multiple times. And you can never predict what they're going to say. And you can never predict what's going to happen in people's lives. And it's more than maybe I'm not that creative fictionally, but I've always astonished by the amount of nuance that each person holds, and the fact that I get to have these like relationships with them, and that it's not always neat, right? Like you can't always tell this like tight, perfect story because there's so many different reasons why people are the way they are and they act the way they are, and life hands us so many different things that I think it's a creative challenge for sure, but it's one that like I think I love people, and I think maybe you have to really love that part of it, and the unscripted nature of life, I guess.
I'm all about the unscripted part of things. Yeah.
And I definitely have a love-hate relationship with people.
Well, but I'm so curious, what are the perks to working with a script?
If I have a script, I can sit down and do a complete breakout. Like I can tell you, okay, it's going to take 4 days and 6 hours to get this filmed and get it right. It's going to take another 6 hours in editing, and that's your total thing. And I will be within half an hour. You know, I mean, like you just know. The old adage is like one page of a script in standard like kind of film format, if you will. One page of script is roughly 1 minute of screen time. Like, so if I have 90 pages of script, I'm going to be between 89 and 91 minutes when the edit's done, if everything's in there. I just know. And the same thing, when I do a breakdown, I can look and say, okay, these scenes, these shots, they're going to be at this location. So I can organize them and say, okay, we're going to go to this location on these 2 days, and we're going to get everything that's in this entire script in 2 days. And, so there's all that. You can do all the pre-organization up front and be very easy and structured. And then the actual production, instead of being chaos, just runs like butter. It's just smooth, and it's you tick the boxes. Great, we got everything we needed. You go into editing. You already know kind of how it's going to go together. So you can put your rough, cut together. Then you can say, yeah, that doesn't look as good. Let's take some of the extra footage we got and let's see what we can do. And you play in little chunks and make each little bit better and refine it. But it's just a different process. And definitely, I know filmmakers who are documentarians who hate working on feature film work. They just absolutely despise it for the same reasons that I like it and despise working on the documentary stuff. I love watching them. I have no interest in like just going I have had clients who are like, well, just come out with the crew and we'll just film. And I'm like, oh God, I just have this dread. We're going to stand there all day and film for 8 hours, and I'm going to come back to the office and be like, we've got nothing to work with. We've got absolutely nothing here, and it's going to be the worst thing, and anyone who watches is just going to be bored out of their mind. And, I just know that that's what, and I've had that happen before, which is why I said this is not for me. There's definitely a different mindset going into one versus the other, and it's funny how they usually don't overlap. The people I know who love making documentaries don't like doing the scripted stuff, and vice versa. And because they are very different in the approach, I think.
Is there a word per minute for you, Lauren? Like Greg just said, a page is a minute of film. Is there like 100 words equals 1 minute of airtime or something?
That's a really good question. We have like a software program that just tells us. I think it's usually like, oh boy, I'm gonna botch it if I try to get it. No. But each host reads at a different rate, right? Some people read slower and some are faster. Yeah. And so we just have a program where we can input it, which is a lazy way of saying it. But you can kind of generally tell, like, oh, I have a 4-page story. It's probably gonna be about 4 minutes.
Okay.
We don't usually go in though with this like we have a range of times that something could be, but I feel like oftentimes. I think what I'm hearing you say, Greg, is like you like to have order and then chaos in the edit. Yeah. And like we front load the chaos and then try to make order of it. And like, so a lot of times we'll go and report the story. And like today I was out and we were recording for hours it will be a 3-minute story, a 4-minute story, a 5-minute story. But like we just gather and then decide like how long it should be and what shape it should take. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the complete opposite.
The librarian in me now just has a question there, Lauren. Do you keep all that? How long do you archive those things?
the non-librarian in me doesn't want to tell you how messy it is. There are certain interviews. I mostly do save things. Whether or not I can find them later is another story.
That's the thing, yeah.
But certainly with certain interviews, like I once, many years ago, had the absolute privilege of getting to produce an interview with Joni Mitchell. And it was one where like she came into our studio at midnight and they did a conversation and like it was just kind of beautiful. I've absolutely saved that, and like that is on my desktop at any point that I can find. There's certain ones that you kind of keep close to your heart, and then there's other ones where it's just like somewhere buried in a hard drive. Maybe I can find that.
And so that leads me into the traditional question we always ask people: is what's that dream piece of tech that you want that you could do? Or tell us, how did you get started? I mean, whatever tech you had at the start, and now it's like, oh my God, it's so much better now versus, no, I really want this. Like, I can see, like, if you've just got a tangle of audio that you could do something like, here, organize this for me.
That would be really nice. I hadn't even thought to ask the universe for that. It's definitely, one of the things that's really hard is you'll talk for like an hour, right? And one of my favorite things to do after an hour-long interview, right, where your brain is just mush at that point, is to talk with your creative partner about your favorite moments from that interview, right? Usually it's like ones that have emotion or like laughter or like some wild language, and I wish that like something could just like take that and just pull all of those cuts for me in my head so I don't have to go back. I've re-listened to conversations so many times. It would be very nice to have that. But one thing I will say is like the tech in terms of the hardware is pretty amazing now. Like people always ask me what kind of equipment or gear I should recommend for a young person. I'm just like, your phone and your computer do so much now. We're so lucky to just have it like right at our fingertips.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. A tool is a tool. A $5 hammer in the hands of a good carpenter is going to do a better job than a $100 hammer in the hands of an amateur. So I spent too many years like being obsessive about gear. And at this point in my life, I've just stopped caring. I'm like, give me whatever you got and I'll make it work. And it's kind of, my philosophy has changed towards it. I think it's easy to get sucked into gear.
Yes.
It's like the newest, greatest toy, the newest, greatest, whatever, microphone or camera or film gear or editing station. And you start realizing after time that they all do exactly the same thing. They may change the colors or the layout or the way it looks if it's computer-based, or if it's a physical thing, one might be slightly larger or smaller, but pick the right tool for the job and it works, you're not going to use like a 1950s, like big ribbon microphone on a boom with a truck, and three guys pushing it to grab an interview in someone's living room. And, you're not going to do it. So it's the wrong tool for the job, regardless of how good it is. And so, I don't know, I kind of stopped obsessing and thinking in terms of gear anymore, just for that reason. Everything's good. You can go in for, like, from a music standpoint, if people build these home studios, you can go in a music store and for $1,000, you can get gear that will do exactly the same thing that we spent $1.2 million building 20 years ago. Exactly the same. It's insane.
And sometimes you want to think about what you're showing up with and like who your audience is, or who you're like, maybe if you're in front of like a film star, that all of that equipment makes a lot of sense. But like, going into a school today, like I don't really want to be a distraction while these kids are trying to learn to read. So like I'm just using my earbuds and I'm just using my small recorder and like a small microphone. Like I don't want to be the star of the show, right? And if you're directing a movie, that's obviously a very different thing. But sometimes you have to think about where you're going to be. If you're in a war zone, maybe it makes sense to be very clearly pressed, or maybe it makes sense to be more discreet. Like you're kind of, I let the like situation determine the tech. If that makes sense.
Nice. I did have a journalist on here once who said she wanted a time machine.
I can think of some financial reasons why that would be. That's how I know that they'll never exist, because if they did, there would be a lot of people who would have come back and already exploited that loophole.
Yeah. And somebody here in the chat for you is agreeing with you guys both, saying that it all depends on what job you're doing at hand for what 100%. You're showing up with. So the one question we always ask people is, or one of the questions, I suppose, is the correct way of phrasing that. What is your biggest failure And what did you learn from it? Because you guys both are successful. You guys have both blown it out of the park with walking, doing all these great things. But what was it that you did wrong, or you made the mistake that you learned from?
You
So
got a
many.
few days. We can go through a list. I mean, I don't know. I mean, everything. People only get to see the successes. They don't see the failures. You're not broadcasting those, so you may fail a dozen times before you get it right. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! You're so talented." And like, you didn't see all the crap that I just did and threw in the trash. That's just the way it is. It's an illusion. The whole thing. The biggest thing, my biggest takeaway, honestly, and this doesn't really answer your question directly, but indirectly, is that at least it's different for journalism, but in the Hollywood and television and the creative arts fields, as far as creating original content, it's all an illusion. It's all, everything you hear is pretty much BS. It's just not accurate. I mean, Hollywood lies. My favorite story is
that was a job.
Yeah. My favorite story is Kevin Costner, Waterworld, right? They build that as the most expensive movie ever made. Okay. I forget what they said the budget was at the time, 300 million. I don't know. I'm making up a number, but they had this huge budget that was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Now, why did they say that? Because people wanted to say, hey, let's go to the movie theater and see what that much money looks like on the screen, right? But if you think about it, the entire movie was filmed in one location in a giant water tank. The biggest name in the movie was Kevin Costner. He did not get paid to do it because he was a producer on it. And he took points on the back end. So where did the money go? It wasn't. All that money was advertising and marketing. They lie. They say, oh, it was a $300 million film. No, they only spent maybe $5 million to make the thing. The other money was spent in advertising and paying the executives and hosting parties and all that other nonsense. And they roll that in the budget because a big number is impressive. And
lots of towels.
Which sounds more impressive? Oh, let's go see that $300 million movie, or let's see that $3 million movie.
Yeah.
Well, every movie's made for about $2-3 million, so it's not impressive. So, or the other way is the other side. Remember that the Blair Witch Project that came out years ago? The like, this found footage thing that was total nonsense. It was all scripted, but they're like, oh, that was only made for $30,000 or whatever they said the budget was. That wasn't true. They had like a $3 million budget. They just said it was made for $30,000 because, again, it sounds more impressive to see what this movie is that was super cheaply made, when in reality they spent pretty much the same as anybody else spent. It's all made up. It's all Hollywood, and everything in it is designed to be selling you an illusion, an image. It's all, same thing on the red carpet. The celebrities go and they wear all this fancy jewelry and clothing. It's all on loan. And security's there to take it back as soon as they walk off camera. It's all a show. And the more you're around it, the more you start to realize everything I thought I knew was just completely a lie. Like, it's all fabricated. And sometimes people fall into the trap of believing the lie that they're helping to spread, or believing that image that they're creating. And it's really interesting. And you can see some weird stuff happen. Some people are very strange, and they get kind of sucked into that. And I've never really been like that. Like, I know I'm terrible at everything I do. I just only show people the stuff that I actually managed to get lucky enough to do right. No one else sees all the other stuff that I screw up. So, and
how about that, Lauren?
Oh man, I can tell you so many failures. I mostly really do like failure. They're hard in the moment, and it is a lesson you'll never learn again. There's, like, I can tell you, there's little things, right, where there's like, every recorder seems to have some sort of button that you accidentally can press, and it still sounds like you're recording, but you're not. And you only make that mistake once ever in your life because you've ruined an interview. I know I have so many friends who have gone through whole interviews in which it did not record. And I'm here to tell you, like, that's normal. It's not great. It's kind of disrespectful of your people's times, but like, that happens and we mess up. And that's why we like learn to double check things. But I think the biggest failures for me are when we talk to people and we don't get their story exactly right, or we've like misspelled their name later, or we have, like not turned a story around. Like there's sometimes stories that we fully report and then like we reported so many pre-COVID, and then it was no longer relevant. Like, we did this whole story about school lunch that was lovely, and all these people gave us their time. And like, I just want to be respectful of that. Like, people are opening up and being vulnerable to us. And to, like, sometimes those stories don't make it to air, and that feels like a failure to the people who have trusted us. And then there have been times where, you know, when I've been in war zones, where often I'm certainly not the only one making the call, but I'm sometimes in the room assessing safety of situations, or helping decide what we should cover and how far away we should cover it to stay safe. And there's no perfect calculus for that. And there's a really high consequence for messing up. And even getting facts wrong in war zones, it's just like the stakes feel so much higher. And I have had so many nights that I've just have kept me up, because those are people's lives. And that feels really hard.
Serious stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. It's not a fun note to end on.
No,
sure.
that is. But that's what we do this for, because that's the real news, the real thing that people should hear. That's what it's like to do this as a career, and to go out, and when you get to these higher levels, like you both have gotten, you're going to have these things happen that you need to watch out. I don't know so much as watch out for, as just be aware of that. Hey, these are the things, the building blocks, as I call them.
But I also think we should talk about our failures, because I think there's shame associated with them. And I can't tell you how many things I have avoided personally because my friends have shared with me their failures. And I was like, oh, I didn't have to learn that lesson because you did it for me. And like, the more we talk about it, like the less shame there is too, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Coming to terms with the fact that failure is just a part of life, and that's a part of any job. You're going to fail. No one comes out of the womb and suddenly is the perfect whatever. You know, it's just the only way to learn. What is it? I think it was Edison. You know, someone asked him, you know, when he kept failing to make an incandescent light bulb, and they said, "How many failures have you had?" And he said, "None. I've just found 99 ways to not make a light bulb." But that's it. It's not really a secret, you know, but it kind of is. It's like a lot of people seem to not be aware that failure is not failure. It's just a part of the process of succeeding. But it's really true. And you gotta break the eggs to make an omelet kind of thing. There's 100 phrases that people use, but it all comes down to
it's only a failure if you don't stand back up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's true. It's like, you know, don't be afraid of failure.
Well, it also happens, like, at least when you're talking about a live show, if you make a mistake and you linger on it for too long, like, it is important to, like, Monday morning quarterback a little bit and reflect on it. But like, I was always told, like, you have to move on, because as soon as you start lingering on the one failure, the live show is still going. You're going to make more and more and more, and it's going to domino. And so I do think there is a little bit of, like, it's natural. You got to brush it off, like, get back up, like, keep going.
I can confirm that from experience.
We'll talk after about the conference that I shut down by mistake when I hit the close all button instead of close the presenter, and shut down the entire conference. It was all sorts of fun.
I can tell you, we had a bring your child to work day, and they were playing in a studio, and I swear everyone was like, there's no way anything, and they somehow took us totally off air for a few minutes. So I feel you.
That is awesome. So one question for you on, now that you've been experienced in the field and you've been doing these things, what do you think you've changed about how you're creative? Not necessarily in what you're doing, but like you said, Lauren, you know, you've got that experience bit now and you've saved other people from it. What do you think you're doing different now than you were at the beginning? Just being creative, not necessarily tools and skills, but just as how you express yourself creatively.
I think that creative cycles in life come and go. And I think I think right now I'm not feeling like particularly creative. And instead of like I think sometimes putting that pressure on to be really creative is actually detrimental to creativity. And so right now I feel like I'm in this mode where I'm stepping back and talking to other people about their creative pursuits and just encouraging them and offering my ideas, because I think that creativity can either take the driver's seat or you can be a cheerleader, and both things are necessary for those projects. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that I approach the work differently, but I think we have cycles where we're tired or we're more inspired or less inspired. And I think you kind of have to learn to take that as it comes and like seize the moment when it's there, but like also know that you can be a support and that's just as creative.
How about it, Gray? What do you think you're doing?
I would say I've never considered myself to be a particularly creative person on the whole. I mean, I do creative things, but I don't think I'm more of I like to say I'm more of an execution person. Like, in other words, if you say, hey, write a script, write a great story, you're not going to get a lot from me. At least certainly not, if I sit down and write something, it's going to be awful. I'm not a writer for the most part. So I struggle a lot of times with that. And I've kind of come to terms with that over the years. And I'm more of an executor. You bring me a really good story, I'll make it look great. I'll execute the plan in a way that makes it successful. That's kind of my strength. But when it comes to creating something from thin air, so to speak, I've never considered myself strong. And I've kind of come to terms recently that, in a way, creativity is failing to fail. It's almost like you try to fail and you somehow miss and accidentally succeed. And it's a weird way of saying it, I know. But, I mean, if you think of some of the most creative things, it's like one exercise in creativity is take two random things and try to stick them together and see if you can come up with something new from it, right? Well, what's a surefire way to make things fail is take things that are unrelated, just jam them together, right? It doesn't work. But yet somehow that sparks something that you end up making it work. And it's kind of a weird way. It's just in my brain. My brain is kind of looking at this way. So I kind of have stopped worrying about the end result. Like, if I want to be creative, I'm doing something, I'm like, well, I don't care what comes out. I'm just going to do this and see what happens, kind of thing. And that's where I find the most creativity comes from, for me anyway, because like I said, I don't consider myself to be unusually creative. I know so many people who are way more creative than I am. And my brain wants to explode. I'm like, how did you come up with that? Where did that come from? And they're like, I don't know. I just kind of I had this idea and that idea, and I stuck them together. And it kind of dawned on me that I think we, as societally, have spent so much time suppressing creativity through our educational system and through just societal norms. Like, if you think about it, we generally, as a culture, don't appreciate free thinkers. We like people who kind of conform. You have a good job. You do. My mother hated that I was going to go into music and the arts, and used to complain all the time, oh, you're going to be starving musician, you're not going to have any money on this. And to the day she passed away, I used to make fun of her because I made more money than she ever did doing this starving musician thing. And I'm like, you have to just do what you want to do things that you experiment and see what comes out of it. And I think creativity comes out of that, the lack of fear to fail, just jump in and do stuff. Yeah. And let it just kind of happen and see what happens. And if you fail, okay, well, that didn't work, and try something different. And when you do succeed with it, other people will look and say, wow, that's really creative. And it's like, no, it was just kind of for me, it was a trial and error process. And it kind of,
I call it jumping off the cliff and building the hang glider on the way down.
Yeah, essentially. And I really think creativity, a lot of it, for me anyway, has to do with that forgetting to be afraid to fail. Kind of putting that out of your mind and just kind of doing and seeing what happens.
One other thing that you just made me think of too is that there is like there is a beauty. I think we celebrate as a society really big creativity, right? Like this, like you do this big project or like, and like the failure can be enormous or whatever. But I also think we should celebrate the small moments of creativity. Mm-hmm. Like, I often am just working on like, it's a story about, right now I'm working on a story about reading, but like I might be able to sprinkle in there just like a couple moments of like a charming, like today, this kid learned the word banana, learned to read it. And there's this moment where they were so excited. And I'm just going to like pop that in for like, it'll be 2 seconds of creativity. Yeah. But like, that is like small creativity begets bigger creativity, and it's all valid.
I agree.
That's an awesome thing.
Yeah. Everything is building blocks. You can't, they like chunking, you can't make a feature film if you don't make, a if you don't shoot a scene. You can't shoot a scene if you don't, you know, write that. And you can't do this if you don't do that. And you have to just do. That's another Wayne Wattism. He would say that. He would say, you know, the paralysis by analysis. Stop thinking about it. Just do it. Do. That's what changes things. That's what makes things happen is you do. So I don't know. That's just the way I look at it.
That's an awesome way of ending this. Thank you to both very, very much. This was really, really enlightening. You guys did amazing stuff for us. Thank you again. Our guests' contact stuff is in the chat and in the links for you to follow up if you need. Let me throw up our final slide here. If you do have any questions that you want to send along, creationstation@broward.org comes right to me, and I'll forward it along for you. And we'll see everybody next month. Have a great day.